used to be for that residential parcel at 2900, I believe. On Saturday during the really nice day, I saw kids playing frisbee and everything. I'd like to see more of that, meaning green space. That for my house there isn't a lot of green space, and it's far enough away to go to Brackett or Matthews Park. As city government and residents move forward and continue to give feedback for Minneapolis 2040, I don't want to see this slated to destroy more trees. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, we have, let's see here, several applications. It looks like 7, excuse me, yes, 7 applications total for this. Would someone like to start us off with a motion? Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
Yeah, I'll move staff recommendation on items A, B, and C.
A motion to move staff recommendation to approve items A, B, and C. Is there a second? Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Commissioner Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that, again, we've received quite a number of comments in the past couple of days about this, and so I'm able to support this now, but I will be looking really carefully, as I'm sure a lot of folks in the community will be as well, at this next phase of the development, just to make sure that these, if you look at just this part of the site, relatively minor changes that are being requested from the regulations are okay, but in that bigger context, just making sure that the overall site is really getting closer to that community desire for a more dense development there. And it sounds like the development team is on the same page with that too, but we'll have to just really make sure that we follow up with that as well.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Slack.
So to that point, I guess, is there anything that needs to be added to this application to ensure that that next phase happens? Is there a condition as part of the site plan approval process that we can somehow connect? Because I guess I would have a hard time approving this without really having some assurances that there will be a next phase for me personally.
Commissioners, I can't think of anything that would be part of this application that would allow you to compel the applicant to pursue future phases. If there are aspects of this plan that you think might preclude something from happening in the future that would make sense on the site, you could do something related to phasing of site improvements, perhaps, to delay some of that or encourage that. But we can't compel the applicant to submit further development plans.
All right. Is there any further discussion? I might just add, and obviously if there was a proposal for a new commercial development today, it would not look anything like this. And this building, while it is a little bit older, it's certainly not at the end of its functional life. So it's probably reasonable to allow the applicant to reuse it. And certainly I do think where we have large areas of surface parking, that is a huge opportunity to really make these parts of the city more dense and can be a very important development opportunity. So I'm very optimistic that will happen sooner rather than later. If there's no further discussion, we have a motion and a second to approve items A, B, and C. Clerk, please call the roll.
Freeland.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
Slack.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Gagnon.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
8-0.
And that motion carries. We have 4 more applications on this item, D, E, F, and G. Would someone like to make a motion? Commissioner Rockwell.
I will move to adopt staff recommendations on D, E, F, and G.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve items D, E, F, and G. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Lukey-Peter.
I have a question for the applicant.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in light of the testimony we've heard today, I'm really hesitant to not put trees out there just in case something happens so we don't end up with a barren asphalt wasteland. But since the neighborhood's concern was that you plant trees and then we chop them down in a couple of years, is there any willingness on your part to relocate those trees when the time arises? That way they aren't just wasted.
I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
I also think that the timing for phase 2 may be.
Circumvents the whole
Yeah.
issue. But just want to make sure. Okay. That was my question. Thanks.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Again, we have a motion to approve items D, E, F, and G. Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
First, I thought I should clarify it's one of those is being returned.
Oh, okay. So the
right.
motion,
D,
Commissioner
E,
Rockwell,
G.
just to clarify that it's D, E, and G and returning item F.
Yes.
So we're moving staff recommendation.
All right. Bender.
Aye.
Gagnon.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Deputy-Peer.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Slack.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. Breland.
Aye.
8-0.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 4. And our final item for discussion today is item 6, that 14th Avenue and Marshall Street. And staff is Mr. Crandall.
Good evening, commissioners. The project before you is located at 14th Avenue Northeast and Marshall Street Northeast. For some context, the site is made up of 5 existing zoning parcels, all currently zoned C1. The southernmost parcel is currently occupied by a commercial property, Dusty's Bar, and the other 4 parcels are currently either vacant or occupied by surface parking. The applicant, as a part of the applications for this project, is requesting a rezoning from the existing C1 neighborhood commercial district to the C3A Community Activity Center district. For some context, in terms of the existing land use policy, this map shows that the site is situated within the Grain-Belt Activity Center district, shown in pink on this map. The site is highlighted in red. It's also located on Marshall Street Northeast, which is an adopted community corridor. And just some general guidance from the city's comprehensive plan about activity centers and community corridors. Activity centers are generally guided for a mix of uses with citywide and regional draw, and also a high intensity of uses. Generally high density to very high density development dependent on context. Community corridors are primarily residential with intermittent commercial uses clustered at intersections and nodes. And they are generally guided for medium density, transitioning to lower density in surrounding areas. This is an aerial of the site as it exists today. You can see Dusty's Bar at the southern end, and then the surface parking and vacant portion of the lot to the north of that. The site is also bordered on the east by a shared alley. So the applicant is proposing a 110-unit residential building. This is a site plan of the first floor. You can see that the applicant is proposing to line the building along Marshall Street Northeast with active uses related to the residential use, including 2 live-work units and a bicycle repair and hobby space on the immediately southwestern corner of the site. And then all parking is accommodated within an enclosed parking garage at grade. The applicant is requesting a variance to reduce the minimum parking requirement. The project qualifies for our reduced transit parking incentive, which allows projects that have 50 units or more to reduce their parking requirement by 50%, bringing its requirement down to 55 spaces. The proposal has 47 vehicle parking spaces, so it's an 8-space variance request. As a part of the project, the applicant is also proposing to formalize and reconfigure the Dusty's parking lot, which today is kind of more of an informal configuration. The primary access to that would be off of Marshall between this project and the existing Dusty's bar. This is a floor plan of what the upper floor layouts will be. And then just to summarize the land use applications, again, rezoning from C1 to C3A, a conditional use permit to increase the maximum height of the building from 4 stories to 6 stories, variance to reduce the minimum vehicle parking requirement, variance to reduce the minimum loading requirement. That's a reduction from 1 large space to no loading space. The applicant is proposing that all loading would be accommodated either in the parking garage, in the right-of-way, or in the shared driveway between Dusty's and the site. And then a variance to reduce the minimum rear yard along the alley, which you can see in this site plan. That's on the eastern portion of the site. The building is actually set back about 4 feet from the alley itself, and there's a planting space there. So there is, I think, it's about 20 feet between that and the other property line. The applicant is here, and I'm going to let them address some of the more detailed design aspects of the project, unless there are any questions.
All right, commissioners, are there any questions of staff? Hearing none, I'll open the public hearing and would like to ask the applicant to speak first. And please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, commissioners. I think the report does a good job of explaining the design goals and community goals of the project, and also describing the city's planning goals and how it addresses those. So I'd like to limit my discussion to some of the concerns that have been brought up by the neighborhood, primarily building bulk and parking. Partly what the project does to address building bulk, I guess I'll note first of all that my client, the owner, owns the property that currently contains Dusty's Bar, and I think a really significant part of this project is the fact that that bar is being preserved and is going to continue to be operated as a bar, very similar to the bar that people know and love. So in addition to continuing that use, it also preserves that scale of development and also works toward having a more smaller scale development of smaller buildings, rather than simply what could have been done is demolish Dusty's Bar and create a much larger development. Secondly, the residential building itself does a number of design things to help minimize the building bulk and also to help break down the scale. Along Marshall Street, it's broken into 2 masses with a recessed slot between them, which is the slot is a stair tower, and it will be heavily glazed so that it will appear like a transparent void between 2 building masses. There's also some 5-foot. There's a 5-foot setback of the portion of the building on the south, and then also the top portion of that southern mass is only 5 stories tall, which also helps to break up the sort of height and repetitiveness that you can see in larger developments. So I guess the goal of the project is to provide new housing for people who want to live in Northeast and who want to avail themselves of the services that are available in this increasingly popular area. The goal is to provide new housing at a development cost that is appropriate for the neighborhood. So compared to high demand areas like the North Loop or Uptown or downtown, it's not simply that the developer wants to provide a lower cost rental mix. It's simply that in this area, people won't pay what they pay in the North Loop or in downtown or uptown. And so because of that, the nature of this development, it is not exactly like a lot of those projects where you have 2 stories of underground parking. Quite simply, the rents couldn't support that development cost. So what we've tried to do is balance as closely as we can, providing as much parking on site as possible while also sort of minimizing its visual impact and providing as many active uses along the street as possible. There was as part of the PDR process, the city traffic engineer requested a technical traffic document, which our consultant prepared and has been submitted to the city. And it describes, regarding the parking variance, it describes a number of strategies that we'll be implementing to help further reduce single vehicle trips. And if it would please the council, I'd like to just read a few of those measures that we'll be taking. Bear with me. So these measures are develop a commuter information program to help familiarize residents with a variety of transportation resources available, which could include a move-in packet for new residents. We're also committed to installing a customized real-time transit screen in the lobby area to inform residents and visitors of current and nearby bus operations. So this is kind of a neat feature that that the city is suggesting. It wasn't a requirement for this project, but we decided to commit to it. And it's basically a real-time transit screen, and the feed will be custom designed by Metro Transit for our location. So we will provide that screen, and it will basically let residents know where buses are in real time, and where to catch them. One of the other things that we're doing is we're really positioning this to have a robust bicycle culture. So beyond providing secure bicycle parking and a bicycle repair room, which is an increasingly common amenity, in order to really promote bicycling as a culture, what we've done is we've positioned that bicycle repair room at grade facing Marshall Street with 2 glass roll-up garage doors. And so the goal is that this is not just a bicycle repair room, but it's also a hobby room. And we can imagine that on weekends, particularly when weather is nice, residents might roll up those doors and work on hobbies together. And so one of the neat things is that while the residential development does not have any specific public uses or retail uses, what we are doing is providing some residential amenities that really help activate the street and provide and will help encourage basically engagement between the community and the residents. The other thing that will help this project promote bicycling is the fact that there's fairly good bicycle infrastructure nearby. So Marshall Street south of Broadway has dedicated on-street bicycle paths in both direction, and they connect to Plymouth Avenue Bridge, which has very robust bicycle facilities. And I did learn from Public Works that this portion of Marshall north of Broadway this summer will become the subject of a study for a bicycle facility. That conclusion is, needs to have a study. But the point being is that the Marshall north of Broadway is on the city's bicycle master plan, and that this summer there's going to be a Public Works study to add that infrastructure. And lastly, there's a new very nice bicycle path along the river that runs just a block past this development, and I think this development will allow for the better utilization of that investment that's already been made, And similarly to the Marshall Street bike paths, that path connects to Plymouth Avenue Bridge, which has dedicated bicycle facilities that will feed into downtown and North Loop. Are there any questions at this time?
Commissioners, are there any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Kronzer.
I have a question. At the corner of 14th and Marshall, there's a utility pole. Are those going to get relocated and buried, or is that power going to stay there?
Correct. The electrical lines on Marshall and also on 14th are going to be buried as part of this project.
Okay. And then referencing the civil plans, it looks like the sidewalks, the public sidewalks, are not being replaced right at the corner. It looks like it's being cut up very haphazardly.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if there's a reason for that, or just.
I think the initial site plan showed kind of sporadic replacement. The PDR report asked that all of the sidewalk be replaced, with the exception of the basically corner that was just recently replaced. There's a very good chance that in the construction of this project that might get damaged. If it does, that will be replaced as well.
Okay, because the cut is longitudinally through the sidewalk, which isn't terribly wide.
Say it again.
The site plan shows the sidewalk being cut longitudinally, which isn't very wide to begin with. So you're really cutting up the sidewalk. It seems unnecessarily, but thank you.
All right, Commissioner Sweezy.
I'm just wondering, does this building have a name? And if so, what will it be?
Some names are being discussed, but we don't know yet.
Anything you feel comfortable sharing?
No.
All right, Commissioner Rockwell.
Thank you. I just want to say, I think the way you're addressing your parking conundrum is great, and I think that's a direction the city should be going in. And I encourage you to really have kind of an iterative process on that once the development is up, to make sure that whatever you're providing, whether it's maps or real-time information packets and so forth, is most useful, because these are goals in other parts of our comprehensive plan now. I anticipate them to be in our next comp plan, is to be bringing our carbon emissions down, getting people out of cars, and so it's encouraging to see that. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll also add that among those strategies that we'll be implementing will be periodic surveying of residents' transit use. I think every 2 years, so then we can kind of adjust the program based on those findings.
Yeah, and I think that providing information as you can, whether it's just a standing map or something else of the full system, I think is helpful, as well as just the lines. And Metro Transit started to do that at their high frequency stations, so people can know where they can actually get to.
All right. Are there any further questions of the applicant? If there are none, we can move on to some other speakers. And how many of you would like to speak on this item? So a few of you. I guess we could start over at this side of the room. You can decide who goes first. And please state your name and address for the record.
Thanks, Commissioners. I'm Jenny Portman. I live at 1515 Grand Street Northeast, and I'm speaking on behalf of Sheridan Neighborhood Organization tonight. There are a couple of things that I think are important to point out. The same developer actually owns the other end of the block as well. So he owns everything on the block but one building, and the proposal for the end of the block will be, there is a land use application already in process, and so you'll see him about that one as well soon. It's similar in that it's a 6-story building, approximately 100 units. And so I'll bring that up at a certain points as I go through and talk about the neighborhood's perspective on the request. In terms of the rezoning, that parcel was rezoned less than 5 years ago to C1. At that time, the current owner needed to get a music license, and so it required a rezoning at the time. The neighborhood happened to be doing our small area plan at that time, so there was a lot of community discussion, including with our council person, about zoning that site C1. And it doesn't seem like it should be so simple to just up the zoning. We learned actually at a meeting with the planning staff recently. The neighborhood learned that we were in an activity center, which we had no knowledge of. That was not something that the community was able to participate in. And I don't think so I know that that's the justification right now for the C3A, but the neighborhood doesn't feel that's a good fit. C1 was the discussed zoning, and it was rezoned to that very recently. Same with the other end of the block. The other end of the block is currently zoned C1. So the neighborhood is not in favor of the rezoning. It would like it to stay C1, which also not in favor of the conditional use for the same reason. It's the height and the FAR that are much better fit in C1. It's all single-family residential in that area and some businesses. And so the C1 concept was to hopefully add some medium density and some commercial use, but not such intensive use. So moving on to the variance for the parking request. I know it's up to the discretion of the developer to, I know it's one space per unit and they have discretion to go to 50% of that if they're near transit. This site is actually 5 blocks from one bus line. And I know that transit funding is, potentially losing 40% of its funding. On top of that, the neighborhood actually has quite a few homes that don't have alley or, garage access. So there are many residents nearby that use the street parking for their own, so many people expect to be able to park near their home. And then also Marshall Street and 13th Avenue are both snow emergency routes. So already with the growing interest in the community, there is becoming quite a parking crunch. In fact, the Greenbelt Apartments did do one site per unit, but they wanted to leave some of it for visitor parking. They've had to convert it all to resident parking because the demand is that high and the streets are still full nearby. So we would like to ask the developer to reconsider the 50% waiver, and we don't support cutting that. I mean, we would like to see a 1 space per unit parking. That alley on both ends has some really strange visibility issues, so narrowing it more, it doesn't seem wise either. Now, there are a few things we like about the development. So the fact that it's infill and that they're leaving some of the buildings there is very good. We're trying to maintain the interesting architecture and the history of the community in place. Now, the 6 stories on either end of a 1- and 2-story building do kind of make these existing buildings look like the holdout in some highway development project, so they don't tie the existing buildings in very well. They kind of just bookend it with big, tall structures. In fact, one of the neighborhood people has some images that kind of help show that. We would like to see them use quality building materials, work closely with the existing neighbors on the alley situation so that they can get a good traffic flow. Take into consideration some of the businesses that are adjacent so that they don't absorb all the parking and don't block out the sun for the draft horses patio. The development basically builds on the entire site, so we'll want to make sure that they have good storm water treatment. And then lastly, part of the C1 zoning is because we'd like to keep Marshall Street an active street. Resident uses weren't exactly what the community had in mind. Maybe more of a commercial use would be preferable. And that's it. Do you guys have any questions for me?
All right. Thank you. I don't see any questions at the moment. Thank you. And who would like to speak next? Yes, please state your name.